NFL free agency is here, and the Denver Broncos' potential plans could have gotten rained on a little bit by some other players deciding to re-sign with their team. We'll talk about how this impacts the Broncos' free agency strategy here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? You know what time it is. It's time for another episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you know it is your team every day. Thank you so much, Broncos Country, for all the everydayers out there. Thank you for making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. NFL free agency is here. It's going to be a wild week here on Broncos Country, so make sure if you're not an everydayer, you become one now by hitting that subscribe or that follow button wherever you get your podcast. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos beat reporter for Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, site expert over there, predominantlyorange.com. We got a lot to break down and digest here as the appetizer for NFL free agency is officially here on Monday, the legal negotiating period. That begins at 10 o'clock a.m. Mountain Time. So how does that set the table for free agency? Well, we'll wrap things up by sharing our thoughts on how active we think the Broncos will be here on Monday. We'll also talk about whether or not Myles Garrett's mega deal impacts Nik Bonitto's contract extension talks in any way, shape, or form. But we're going to kick things off by highlighting an issue here to start free agency. Several players that were rumored to be targets of interest for the Broncos in free agency deciding to re-sign with their teams at a couple of key positions. How does that impact their focus and strategy for the rest of free agency? Sayre, I mean, a couple of the key positions Denver, is known to be in the market for here, tight end and linebacker, where the Broncos, I think we expected them to maybe be active and some big names here. Some of those big names are now not available here as the Broncos get ready to start free agency here at 10 o'clock a.m. Mountain Time.
Yeah, I suppose let's start with the position that they're expected to maybe make the biggest splash, which is the linebacker position, Cody, where Nick Bolton went back to Kansas City on a deal worth $15 million per year. That was shortly after, obviously, Zach Bond, not too long ago, re-signed with the Philadelphia Eagles for $17 million per year. So the top inside linebackers coming off the board before things even get started. Of course, there's certain players still available. I know on your top, potential Bronco signings list was Dre Greenlaw of the 49ers. He's still available as of the time we're recording because, look, it seems like the teams are plucking Broncos targets off the board as we speak. But Jamien Sherwood also available. And then there's kind of lower tier guys, Devin Bush, players like that, maybe Willie Gay Jr., who are potential additions, I guess. But I don't know if Cody Barton's coming back at this point. I mean, that's kind of where things seem to be trending, Cody. It just feels like this is not a good overall free agent class when you look even at the positions the Broncos aren't going to be active in. It's just not a good free agent class. And that's why we're seeing tons of money being handed out to other players and things like that, and guys being taken off the board. So it does put the Broncos in a tough position, obviously, because they want to be able to attack some of these areas of need before NFL free agency. Their best avenue of doing so at this point, it might be some trades and some moving of late round picks.
Yeah, we'll have to look at maybe what that's going to look like or what players would be worth maybe trading some assets for, in terms of, hey, like we really need this position. We need this type of player. Let's go out and get it. I mean, the linebacker one, you and I talked about this with the Bond episode we did last week is, all right, does this maybe change the Broncos' priority of making a big splash at another position? And, you can't help but look now with Nick Bolton off the board here, a team that a player the Broncos were interested in potentially there, 25 years of age. I mean, that's where it's like, okay, I can look at a $15 million per year and say, hey, that's justified. To your point, right now for me, I look at the list of free agents available. The Devin Bush is not necessarily in the same tier, I think, as Dre Greenlaw or even Jamien Sherwood, who's I think is probably going to be the under-the-radar type of guy that goes in free agency this year, whether to Denver or another team. I think Sherwood's a tremendous young player here. But now all of a sudden I look at him like I understand the importance that Denver needs to get a linebacker. But at this point, Sayre, if there's no one that you feel like is a evidently tangible upgrade over what you had last year, why not just run it back with Cody Barton, Drew Sanders, like have him compete with Drew Sanders to play alongside Alex Singleton. I mean, worst case scenario, Cody Barton and Alex Singleton start again. They were solid early on when they were both playing together there at linebacker. So I'm not opposed to that necessarily, but when you look at some of the guys that were available, you wish you would at least been in on it. But obviously, teams have the opportunity before their guys hit free agency to go in and say, hey, we really want to keep you. We don't want to let you hit the free agency market. Let's find a way to come to terms on a deal. That certainly was the case for Nick Bolton. But Sayre, even like we saw a run over the weekend of tight ends re-signing with their teams, which, I think Zach Ertz was a name that was brought up. And you and I have had this conversation here. We both agreed, like, I don't see him leaving Washington where he had success with Jaden Daniels. I don't see the Commanders getting rid of him because they found out how great of a security blanket he was for the rookie quarterback last year. He re-signs with the Commanders over the weekend. You look at Mike Gesicki, who we thought would be an under-the-radar type name that the Broncos could add at the tight end position. That is a clear, tangible upgrade from a receiving standpoint than anybody they have on the roster. He re-signs with the Cincinnati Bengals. So it makes it easy for Cincinnati. Hey, they're going to go score 47, 48 points this year, but their defense, they're going to give up probably 50, 52 at that point from that standpoint. So, you miss out on Gesicki possibly there. And then even Tommy Tremble is kind of that under-the-radar name that I know you had talked about in Carolina. He re-signs there. So for me, I look at it as well right now in terms of free agents that are available. Sayre, I think there's only two that really stand out. It's like, all right, hey, if Denver gets them, that's a clear upgrade. Juwan Johnson, obviously. And I also think Evan Engram, who was released by the Jaguars due to a failed physical. And that's something I think will obviously be taken care of here in Denver. I think he would pass it here. But those become the top two guys I think that are available right now if you want to really upgrade that position in free agency.
And that's the state of where things are at, really, is what it is that the options are dwindling already by the minute, and we haven't even got to the legal negotiating period at this point, which is discouraging if you're a Denver Broncos fan and you want to see the team make the big splash. But there again, sometimes the best deals are the deals that you don't make, right? And so you never know when the pivot is going to be the better option, actually. So at linebacker, is it a trade for Bobby Okereke, who's been known to be available from the New York Giants? Or at tight end, is it somebody else? I mean, you look around the league, there's obviously different players that you can trade for. Like, is Mark Andrews available now that the Browns have re-signed Myles Garrett and they're eating so much cash on Deshaun Watson? Is David Njoku available in Cleveland? I think there's so much more that might be on the table via trade this offseason than, and that market could be driven up too because of the lack of depth in free agency. There's not even really a lot of guys that you would look out there at either of these positions and kind of say like, that guy was a really good prospect, and he just, for whatever reason, it didn't start well, and he's just started to pick up his stride lately. There's not really even many guys like that, at least specifically when you're talking about tight ends. With linebackers, there's at least formerly highly drafted guys. But to me, Cody, you're looking at these positions of need for Denver at this point. Do you shift and pivot your attention to like a wide receiver? Do you say, well, I mean, we had the $15 million budgeted for the linebacker, and we had this budgeted for this position, but now these guys they're off the board. So why not go spend $25 million a year on Chris Godwin? Like, I mean, I'm not saying who cares at this point, but I mean, like, let's go for it. I mean, I think you need to find ways to make the biggest impact on this team. It's not just finding, okay, who's the next most expensive linebacker that we can buy. That's an addict's mentality towards shopping, Cody. And I know because have been addicted to shopping in the past and maybe still am today, but it's like, oh shoot, I didn't win the draw for the Jordan 5, black metallic reimagined. So I'm going to go spend $1,200 on Travis Scott Jordan 1 shoe. For anybody that's a sneaker collector, you resonate with that. But what I'm saying is that you don't just immediately say, hey, this was my target, and now I'm just going to go buy the next most expensive thing I can find because I missed out on my target. Maybe you shift, okay, where was that budget going? Where can we reallocate it and have multiple plans? Because we know George Payton, Sean Payton, they weren't unprepared for Nick Bolton re-signing in Kansas City.
Well, I think when you look at it as well, if you want to still look at linebacker, maybe the Broncos shift their focus. Okay, we're not going to make a big splash there, but there is this guy that we like that let's bring him in. Let's see what he can do, because if he can play to the potential in which we think or our scouts have identified what he can bring to our table, then maybe it's a low risk, high reward type of move. Maybe Denver shifts their focus to those types of deals for some of those players. Very interesting, though, to see how the market, is changing now. A lot of people are saying that this year's free agency class, from a widespread perspective, is kind of mid, is what they're saying, because there's so many guys available. It's like you're not going to get too many guys who are going to be breaking the bank from a massive standpoint. And obviously, that's going to lead to us talking about Myles Garrett. Obviously, here on today's show, how does that impact Nik Bonitto with a potential contract extension as Denver's trying to work out free agency? The draft is coming up. That is something Broncos Country we're going to debate and discuss here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country, today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at TurboTax. And this is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile apps. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees.
In a shocking turn of events, the Cleveland Browns have paid Myles Garrett a contract that is worth $40 million per year. While we can look back 10 years ago at Von Miller resetting the market at $20 million per year, Myles Garrett's new deal could end up making Nik Bonitto look like an absolute bargain if and when the Broncos re-sign him. But does that mean that Bonitto's price has now gone up? We're going to discuss that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. But Broncos Country, thanks so much for joining us today and every single day. For all you everyday listeners out there, you already know your boys Cody and Sayre. We got you covered every single step of the way here in NFL free agency. Cody, I don't care if I got to be called out of a cold, dead sleep in the night. If something happens for the Denver Broncos, we're going to be doing a breaking news episode on the pod here. So for anybody that's not already subscribed, you're going to want to make sure you do that so you don't miss a single episode or bit of news when it comes to your Denver Broncos. And although Myles Garrett doesn't play for the Denver Broncos, he's certainly resetting the market amongst pass rushers. I definitely didn't get the impression, Cody, that his trade request earlier this offseason was anything to do with a contract extension, but as they say, money talks, and the Cleveland Browns just gave a lot of money to Myles Garrett, $40 million per year on a 4-year extension. That's after Max Crosby signed a massive contract extension with the Las Vegas Raiders. The Broncos are looking at their situation with Nik Bonitto. There's no way they're going to be waiting till next year at this time to try to re-sign him, right? I mean, this puts urgency behind what they're trying to get done with Bonitto, right?
Yeah, no, I think it does. But the question here, Sayre, is where do they go? What does that price range look like from an average annual value per year at this point? That is where things are very blurred right now when it comes to the Broncos. They're, pending extensions here with Nik Bonitto and even Zach Allen, right? Because let's look at Myles Garrett. Yes, he's a pass rusher, but he plays the defensive end position. He's not a stand-up outside linebacker. Max Crosby, not a stand-up outside linebacker. He's a hand-in-the-dirt defensive end. When you look at what Nik Bonitto does, Nick is a stand-up outside edge rusher, right? And who has more of an opportunity and obviously took advantage of it to impact in the passing game, not only by pressuring the quarterback, getting sacks, QB hits, but also generating interceptions, pick sixes, fumble recoveries for touchdown, things like that. And so for me, it's like, how do you, with this new thing, with Myles Garrett's mega deal, the highest paid non-quarterback contract in NFL history, it certainly is going to make the market not just only, a little more muddier for pass rushers, but look at Jamar Chase and the Cincinnati Bengals. They were anticipated to make him the next highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history. So what is that going to look like? 41, 42 million per year for Jamar at that point at wide receiver? To me, it's crazy. Even Trey Hendrickson, a defensive end, not a stand-up edge rusher, looking around 30 to 32 million per year. Sayre, I look at Nik Bonitto and I'm thinking to myself, what is the right price tag range for him, right? Obviously he's a talented player. You want to take care of him. To me, I don't see them going over 25 million per year though, especially if they have to do another deal with Zach Allen at this point. For me, I think their price range for those two guys has to be between the $20 to $25 million APY. I don't see it being anything over that. I'm curious for your thoughts on that. And I also for Broncos country, how are you feeling about that potential price tag range?
Right. I think you do have to draw a line in the sand when it comes to re-signing guys, because obviously you have to build a team. And really what we should be looking at now, and maybe I really hope outlets will start kind of reporting in this way, but like what percentage of the salary cap is a guy taking up? That's exactly what I think would be the most valuable. And it would be really important for us to all be able to shift our vernacular to that, because at this point, that matters a lot more than the average annual salary or the cap hits or things like that. Because ultimately, you could say a guy, hey, this guy's going to have a $25 million cap hit. We have no idea. Well, what percentage even of the cap is that relative to what it was, 5 years ago? Because a guy making 25 million this year, that might be similar to what a guy making 12 million was 5 years ago. So it's all about percentage of the cap as well. And I think there's a certain percentage threshold, even as you project the cap forward, where you would have to draw a line in the sand with somebody like Nik Bonitto and say, hey, like, we literally just drafted Jonah Ellis, right? And we feel good about Dondre Tillman providing depth. We re-signed Jonathan Cooper. Pass rushers come available every year. Heck, you would then have to start having internal discussions like this. Okay, if Nik Bonitto wants $25 million a year, would we not entertain the idea of trading future picks or going after somebody like Micah Parsons in a trade if the Cowboys can't keep him? I mean, those types of discussions become more realistic the closer you get to paying a guy that big of money. And it's not to say that the outcome of that is going to be, hey, we're trading for Micah Parsons, but it's just to say you draw a line in the sand so that you don't go overboard with re-signing a guy when you could go get the best player at his position for not that much more.
Well, and I think the challenge now with pass rushers specifically is that seems to be the one position that is growing from a contract valuation standpoint, and the demand, obviously, like, you have to find good pass rushers. Like, heck, even former Bronco Baron Browning got a pretty solid contract extension there with the Arizona Cardinals on the eve of NFL free agency. And, luckily you've already got Jonathan Cooper locked up. You've got rookie contract control over Jonah Ellis. You got obviously a year-to-year situation here with Dondre Tillman, who was an exclusive rights free agent who they tendered. I think he's got, after next year, he'll be in the RFA again. And I think after that, then he'll be an RFA. So there's cost control here with two of those positions, at least for the Broncos. And then you got obviously your extension there with Coop. You need pass rushing waves in today's NFL, right? We've seen what it's like when teams don't have a guy that can get to the quarterback. It puts the defense in a bind. It makes your inside linebackers look rough. It makes your secondary struggle because you're not getting that generated pressure output that you need to succeed in today's NFL, especially against some of the offenses that you're going to play. Some of the offenses here this upcoming season, Denver's going to play. I like their pass rush room as it is. But in terms of keeping that room together, obviously you want to do it. Coop's locked in for the long term. You want Nik Bonitto here for the long term. It's just trying to find that common ground now. And maybe the selling point here for the Broncos, like, Nik Bonitto wants to get paid and deserves to get paid, but maybe the selling point is, hey, we really believe, like, here's what we're willing to offer you. We believe this right now. I understand the market out there is crazy, but we believe that we can really win here in the next 2 to 3 years or within this year window. We want to maximize that. And in order to do that, we have to have the best team possible. We want to bring back guys like Zach Allen. We want to be able to add guys for Bo Nix to throw to be able to make this offense really go. Maybe there's a selling point, not saying taking a hometown discount, but how can the Broncos best pitch and sell maybe guys like Zach Allen and Nik Bonitto for I would say fair level market deal here, not just for their positions, but for the team as well. That's going to be the tough part about negotiating this thing.
Yeah, because you don't just reset the market with the next guy, right? This isn't like the NBA where there's basically predetermined max contracts and things like that for players. And it's like this superstar is getting paid as much as this superstar, even though this guy is like an actual superstar and this guy is only good for, whoever. It's way different in the NFL because there are tiers to this whole thing. And you just, like I said, you can't go back. You can't go past that line in the proverbial sand that you've drawn when it comes to re-signing even your own guys. Although that is George Payton's philosophy, is to get guys to a second contract. I think you have to really look at comparables as well. I know Spot Track does something like that where they kind of look at, hey, here's some comparable players in the past and their production and their age at signing and what they signed for. Although that kind of stuff is you're almost able to just rip it up after year at this point, aren't you? Because things are changing so dramatically with the exponentially increasing salary cap in today's NFL. So it does make it a bit tougher, but as we're seeing around the league, I mean, contracts are getting done. There's the clear evidence of inflation when it comes to like Hollywood Brown getting as much money as he did, Cody, or Tutu Atwell getting as much money as he did, even Zach Bond getting $17 million per year. I mean, we're living in a different world of the NFL right now. And so it does complicate things a little bit. It might force teams back to the negotiating table, but I still think you draw that line in the sand.
We'll see how it impacts the Broncos as they're looking to get contract extensions done, not only with Nik Bonitto, but Zach Allen and potentially Courtland Sutton before or after the NFL draft here. But Broncos country, how do you feel about Nik Bonitto and his potential contract extension? Does it get impacted, or Zach Allen's by Myles Garrett's mega deal? Make sure you let us know wherever you're catching Locked On Broncos. We're not done yet here, Broncos country. Sayre and I, we're going to share our thoughts on how active we think the Broncos are going to be here on Monday when the legal negotiating period opens up at 10 o'clock a.m. Mountain Time, including we're going to share what position we think gets taken off the board first here for the Broncos. We'll break that down and much more here on today's episode of the show. Broncos country, today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel. And as you all know, at FanDuel, they are America's #1 sportsbook, and March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before, because right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting the nets down. You can pick some of your favorite teams in the tournament this year. You can stay in on the action while the tournament games are ongoing live. You can do live betting. And the FanDuel app is simple and it's easy to use. And when I win, I get paid instantly because there is no waiting around. FanDuel makes it easy to get in on all the action. So visit FanDuel.com today and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. The fourth quarter action of today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is here, and so is NFL free agency. The legal negotiating period, or the legal tampering period, as many people continue to talk about, begins officially at 10 o'clock a.m. Mountain Time, and that's when deals can essentially be agreed upon in principle, and then they become official beginning on Wednesday at 2 o'clock p.m. Mountain Time when the new league year officially rolls around. Just how active will the Denver Broncos be? We'll share our thoughts, and we'll share maybe even what position we think the Broncos could address first here as it pertains to free agency here. Real quick, I want to say thanks once again to everyone in Broncos country, all the everydayers, for making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. Sayre, this is kind of more so our thoughts, what we predict will happen here, because either the Broncos, and this is the fun part about social media, either the Broncos are going to take forever to do something, or they're going to be active very early, and then there's going to be a lot of discussion, some bonus episodes, some breaking news episodes here, Locked On Broncos. How active do you think Denver will be here on Monday?
I think they're going to be very active, Cody. I think as much as George Paton talked about being measured, I do really get the sense that the Broncos are going to be very targeted with the guys that they're trying to get in free agency. Now, does that mean that certain deals won't take more than a day to get done? Absolutely not. But as we already know, these deals are getting done behind the scenes. These deals are being, numbers are being thrown out at the combine. That's the tampering period at this point. The NFL has had to turn a blind eye to that for a long time at this point. But I think what we know to be true is that the Broncos are typically going to get at least somebody within the first day or two of free agency. And I do believe that they're going to come away with somebody on day one. I think it's going to be whatever you would consider a tier 1 free agent to be from this crop of players that's out there, whether it's a receiver, a safety, a linebacker, maybe even a defensive lineman now that it looks like the 49ers might be paving the way for DJ Jones to come back home. I could see it being any one of those positions. And I just feel like that's where the Broncos kind of need to go, because those are that's the positions where you can't afford to miss out on your top targets.
No, I agree with you. And the one thing I don't want to see Denver do is, we talked about it at the beginning of the show here. We're talking about maybe linebackers, tight ends. I don't want them to go out there and just say, okay, hey, let's just go get a guy so we don't miss out on adding someone to the mix. Like I want Denver to have this mindset, and I'm sure they have that, right? Obviously, we know the top names in free agency that are available. We know the guys that re-sign with their teams, but is there somebody out there that is available that they're like, hey, this is a guy that maybe everyone says that these guys were the top targets. We actually believe that this guy was the top target. And we believe that this guy's going to be a little bit of a needle mover, a difference maker here. I think everyone's thinking about Juwan Johnson at tight end, possibly. I think a lot of people are expecting that to be the first move that the Broncos make. You brought up DJ Jones, which I find, this is a very interesting part as well. You look at what has happened so far in terms of some guys re-signing, like the Seattle Seahawks. They're undergoing a massive rebuild right now from the looks of it, but they're keeping obviously a couple of their key players intact. Jaron Reed, obviously a defensive tackle. He just got a 3-year, $25 million per year, not $25 million per year, 3-year, $25 million total deal at this point. DJ Jones' last contract he had was a 3-year, $30 million deal. DJ's a little bit younger here. Is this the price point here? But then again, we saw DJ post a tweet over the weekend on Sunday about his value. Like, people will tell you what your value is, but you deep down, you have to know what your own value is at this point. So is that a subliminal message? Is that something that's indicating that he's moving on? We don't know just yet. If the Broncos re-sign a guy, I imagine first off, their top priority would be to get DJ Jones back. We'll see if that's the first domino that happens here for Denver. That doesn't have to happen at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, but that can happen anytime before. If not that, I think the Broncos, that big splash, I think it's a wide receiver, Sayre. We talked about a few of the veteran options there. You mentioned Chris Godwin is one of those guys you hope for. Then there were reports over the weekend of Chris Godwin being in the camp of maybe making $27 to $28 million per year, and that the New England Patriots are probably like the prime contender to drive that price up possibly here for Godwin. So where do you think they go? Like, for me, I think it's going to be a receiver. I don't know if it's going to be a Chris Godwin splash, but I do think that they're going to add, as Mike Kliss says, a veteran of note, a player of note that is clearly like a on par level with Courtland Sutton or a wide receiver 2 right behind him.
Could be somebody like Darius Slayton, who's becoming available from the New York Giants, who's kind of had a raw deal when it comes to the quarterback position in his situation there and might have a little bit more than meets the eye. It could be guys that we've talked about before, like Keenan Allen, Cooper Kupp. It could be somebody like that, right? Or Amari Cooper, who has a connection to Kerry Colbert on the coaching staff. Could be somebody like that. I would still love to see the Broncos go after Chris Godwin. And here's my sales pitch on that. If the New England Patriots are willing to go all out for Chris Godwin, why would the Broncos not be? Like, I know the Broncos have Courtland Sutton and the Patriots don't exactly have a Courtland Sutton, but the reason why the Patriots are going after Chris Godwin is to help Drake May. And like, this is where I feel like I'm taking crazy pills, Cody. I feel like Mugatu on Zoolander, where he's like, am I taking crazy pills? It's the same look. I'm like, we're in the same spot. We've got a quarterback, got a young quarterback who receivers let him down all year last year. And we're talking about adding, the bottom of the barrel guys at receiver, or just running it back, or adding Juwan Johnson. Like, freaking go get Chris Godwin, do something. Like, that's what I'm saying. I'm not trying to be impatient. I'm not trying to be shock jock or hot take or things like that. But seriously, if the Washington Commanders are in on Deebo Samuel, why not us? If the New England Patriots are in on freaking Chris Godwin, why not the Broncos? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. All these other teams with young quarterbacks, the Chicago Bears, they just traded for 2 interior offensive linemen because Caleb Williams got sacked almost as much as David Carr when he was a rookie. Like, to me, it's foolish. It's roster malpractice, since I could still throw that out there, because all these other teams are going after upgrades for their quarterback. And what are the Denver Broncos doing? If they sit on their hands, Cody, I'm going to be throwing hands on the podcast early on this week.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you as well. And when you look at some other teams that are making moves, look, we didn't get a chance to react to it, but the Las Vegas Raiders, they go and they add Geno Smith, which I think that makes them better than they were last year at the position. But the whole idea, in which I laughed at, is, oh, you're going to trade from him, then you're going to extend it, like give him a 3-year extension. Like, to me, it's like a 1 to 2 year bridge quarterback deal. But it's like, all right, now that they've got that, and they'll probably sign Tyler Lockett in free agency. But now they're in a position where they can go out and help build a foundation by maybe adding an Ashton Genty from Boise State as little in the first round as where they're at right there. So Denver's got to make moves here to help Bo Nix get better. Like, this is where you can't let other teams necessarily dictate how you approach it. but you have to be cognizant of the fact that, okay, we have to get better because everybody else around us is getting better. Our competition is getting better. And in order for Bo to continue to grow, you need to amplify this team around him. It's not just on Bo. Bo was the offense in 2024 here for the Broncos. Let there be no question about that. But Bo simply cannot do it on his own. You don't want to put him in that position. Make your team better. Go out and do it. But don't be desperate in the way that you do things, or, don't. Like, my biggest worry is if Denver goes out there and tries to get a guy, they get into a bidding war with someone, let's say for a position, maybe like tight end, and then it ends up costing them more than it should, but it's not a guy who's necessarily going to be maybe a better addition than what you've already got, or maybe you can go younger in the draft and just focus on that. Like, to me, I'm very curious to see how Denver's mindset shifts because of what's happened over the weekend with players re-signing, what the market currently looks like. Does that change how aggressive they want to be or how measured they'll be? To me, that's going to be the biggest key here. And look, Broncos Country, one thing we can guarantee you, your boys, Sayre Bedinger, myself, Cody Roark, we're going to be here every step of the way. We're on standby. We got our cup of coffee already brewed. We're waiting for news to happen because you're going to get instant coverage here on Locked On Broncos, breaking down why it's a good move or a bad move here for Denver, offensively, defensively, special teams, whatever it may be. And on top of that, you get our written work as well, milehighsports.com for myself. Sayre writes over there, predominantlyorange.com. NFL free agency is here. The frenzy begins. Broncos Country, buckle up. We got you covered with reactions to whatever moves the Broncos make here on tomorrow's episode of the show. We'll see you then.